Hey Pro Nerds, welcome to a very special episode of Unbox It right here on Project Nerd. My name is Iggy and I am bringing you a very awesome product today that we get to unbox and check out. The folks over at MedievalCollectibles.com sent us this really cool replica. I do want to say first, they gave us kind of a choice to look at, and I partnered with our video editor Ryan, which you'll be hearing from later as we show you some footage of this awesome replica. He'll give you a little history lesson, maybe some more detail around it that I didn't even explain, because he's the one who's going to get to keep this because, well, it's right up his alley. But it is also right up my alley because I'm gonna be honest, I snuck a peek and this is pretty awesome. So once again, the folks at MedievalCollectibles.com wanted us to check out a product, share it with our listeners, fans, readers, wherever you're picking up this episode of Unbox It, and they sent over a Denix brand George Washington Flintlock replica gun. And Denix has been around since 1967. Been making props, and I'm going to tell you what, based on the weight of this box, there's some good props in here. So let's check this out and open it up. We go. Woo! It's impressive. As I said, I already snuck a peek, but it doesn't take away from getting the chance to check this out again. This is a replica gun, so does not work. There is no way, at least I believe there's no way you could load this and put anything in it. But at the same time, there are no plastic pieces on here. This is completely metal and wood. And let's just check this out. Listen to this action. Really awesome. I'm going to show you some of the detail they have on the side here. The wood carvings even on the top and down into just the intricate detail on this thing. Wow, I didn't even notice this right here on the butt end of the gun. Ooh. I feel like this could hurt somebody. So you might, if you are a cosplayer, looking at some of the props over at MedievalCollectibles.com, might be limited on what you can get into certain convention centers, because if the swords and daggers are anything as close to this amazing gun is, they're going to be heavy duty. They're going to be made with real metal, although they won't be real weapons. So it'd be great for LARPing, role-playing, shoots of all nature. Wow, just wow, impressive. Let's take a look at more detail of this gun. We're going to start down here at the butt of the gun, just that metal piece casing, the detail on it. I would assume very close to the replica. I don't know if General Washington would have had his name across the back of the gun, but it is here. As well as we have a number of different pieces, as I mentioned, along the left side of the gun. So the side that doesn't have the trigger mechanism is going to have an insane amount of detail here, including horses, other carvings in the metal. As you can see, these are legitimate metal screws holding all these pieces together. No glue. There might be some glue within there, but the glue is not the bonding piece to keep this together. And once more, no plastic parts. It's got a lot of weight to it. I would say probably a couple pounds on it. Just to finish it odd to say it, but a smell to it, that genuine smell of that metal that came out. I feel like this could be polished up even real nice. It looks great out of the box, but if you really wanted that shine, some polish up there with the wood, I really, I want to be honest and unbiased here, so I'm looking for anything negative to say about this. And the only thing negative I would say is that if you're a cosplayer, not a collector, is you might have a hard time getting this into a convention center or for a convention when we're able to go to conventions again, because of the detail and the weight. It's just realistic. It is incredibly realistic. It's made in Spain. Once again, Denix is the brand, and they've been making prop replicas since 1967. MedievalCollectibles.com not only has their products, but many of their own products, as well as other products across the board. As we were combing the website, we noticed cloaks, as I mentioned earlier, swords, daggers. There's other replica pistols, things from all kinds of eras, for collectors, cosplayers, everything. Ryan, our editor of the video, who again is going to give you a little history lesson here in just a second, is likely going to put this on his shelf, and it is going to be a centerpiece, and I'm sure a talking piece for when people come over to his place, because I am impressed. This is less than $100 on the site too. Normally, I feel like props of this type would be a couple $100 that you may stay away from, but I feel like you could stock a really awesome shelf of replica collectibles for a very decent price. One more time, I'm going to give you a little bit of that action here for pulling the trigger, cocking it. Wow, just wow. Let's take a close-up look at this gun while Ryan, as I mentioned, walks you through a brief history lesson on some flintlock pistols.
Thanks, Iggy. And you're right, this is right up my alley. So much so that I've recorded this multiple times, and more often than not, I end up completely geeking out over it, ending up with a recording that's far too long to use. So let's try the Reader's Digest version. This thing is cool. First impressions, the heft to it just makes it feel so real, which is part of why I ended up spending half an hour just turning it over in my hands, geeking out over every last detail of this piece. I love early firearms. I love technology in general and early technology. I like seeing the innovations right at the beginning of the life of a particular technology. So when it comes to firearms, the Revolutionary War era, it has got to be my favorite. And that's because you see a lot of ingenuity trying to solve certain problems. But you also see that this is before modern manufacturing techniques. So everything in this time period is handmade, period. So you see a lot of care taken with making these particular firearms. On top of it, we have a replica of a very specific firearm from history, which we'll get into later. Now, with matchlock firearms, matchlock, with flintlock firearms, matchlock is the earliest form of handheld firearms. Flintlock is the third generation of lock mechanism. The lock refers to the firing mechanism in general. And so lock refers to the same thing for many, many years. But the designation, matchlock, wheel lock, flintlock, cap lock, has to do with the method of ignition. In this case, we have a flintlock, which means it's a piece of flint clamped between the jaws of the hammer that strikes against the frizzen. Let me get the focus in here. The frizzen is this L-shaped piece of steel. It's got a kind of a spoon shape when you view it from the back. And that's what the flint strikes against to create a spark to ignite the firearm. So using flint and steel, it is a flint lock firearm. Now, this is a muzzle loading firearm. So this particular era, you would load from the muzzle. You'd have your primary charge, your wadding, and then the musket ball directly in front of it. And that's what's loaded in the barrel. On the outside of the weapon, you have right here, this is the priming pan where you'd have a little bit of powder that would ignite the main charge once the flint strikes the steel. And we get a lot of, as a language nerd, we get a lot of terms from this era of pistol. So I said priming pan. If you've ever seen one of these flintlock weapons go off, there is a big flash of fire and smoke that happens coming from the priming pan as soon as it's ignited, but there's a slight delay between that and when the main charge goes off, sending the round down range. Sometimes that big flash doesn't actually ignite the main charge. That's where we get the term flash in the pan, is this pan right here filled with powder, flash goes off, big to-do, big flurry of effort that doesn't actually accomplish anything, hence flash in the pan. Really cool. Another term that comes from this era is the frizzen here has two different main functions. One is to be the strike plate for the flint. The second main function is to actually cover the pan. You filled the pan with powder. You don't want that powder to spill when you change orientations. And you also want to protect it from the elements. You don't want rain, water to get into your powder. Wet powder doesn't ignite. So you actually close the frizzen, and that creates a lid to the whole pan that covers the powder to protect it from the rain and to also keep it in place when you need it. But in order to load the pan and close the frizzen, you have to pull the hammer back from its fired position into what's known as half-cocked. Half-cocked is just far enough out to close the frizzen, load the weapon, but it's not far enough back to where it will actually strike the pan and create a spark. So that's where we get the term don't go off half-cocked or a half-cocked plan, because you're not fully prepared and you could be going into the battle not being prepared. You would then, once you've loaded it, pull it back to full cock. And I love that this piece is a functioning, well, it has the functioning mechanism for the hammer. I've got the frizzen closed. I pull the trigger. The hammer strikes the frizzen, knocks it forward just like it would in the real thing. And we've fired the weapon, even though this is a non-firing replica. Love that little detail. All right, so we've broken down the lock. That's a main piece. Let's get this back into focus down here. So I keep talking about the lock mechanism. Lot going on here. That's the majority of the mechanics happening with this era of firearms. The lock is part of another term that we use frequently. Lock, stock, and barrel. Maybe you're thinking of Lock, Stock, and Two Smoking Barrels. Great movie. But lock, stock, and barrel refers to the weapon as a whole. And that's because often in this time period, different pieces were made by different gunsmiths. In this case, the lock was manufactured, you can see by the maker's mark right here. The lock was made by John Hawkins. The stock and barrel, if I look on the other side, I can see the maker's mark for, let's get that in focus, made by Richard Wilson. So you can see his maker's mark and initials here, which is a really cool detail. Now you might be thinking, Richard Wilson, RW, why is that a V? I'm not entirely sure. I think this might actually be an intentional reproduction of a defect in the original. Now, when you would stamp a piece of metal, you have a hardened piece of steel that's usually like a cylinder with the letters in the end, and you'd hit the end with a hammer. You may not always line it up perfectly, and particularly with a rounded barrel, you might end up with part of it not being flush with the barrel. And so you could get a partial. So the V is most likely half of the W for Richard Wilson. Very interesting detail. I hope that's realistic. I need to look up high resolution photos. I'll share it if I can when I edit the video, but just another cool detail. So lock, stock, and barrel refers to this in particular is really common in this era when different parts of the weapon was made by different gunsmiths. So now let's get into the history of this particular replica. As I mentioned, this replica was made by two different gunsmiths. Well, not the replica, the original. We have John Hawkins. Let me get this in focus again. We've got John Hawkins, who manufactured the lock, and then we also have Richard Wilson, who manufactured the stock and barrel. John Hawkins was highly sought after gunsmith of the era, and so was Richard Wilson. Richard Wilson was also a highly sought after furniture maker, which explains why he was so good with metal and wood. Really elegant, really well made piece, originally made in 1748. Purchased by a member of the Thomas family, who's family friends with the Washington family, and eventually gifted to George Washington himself. After the fact, and yes, Iggy, this nameplate here, let's get that in focus. This nameplate here was actually on the originals. If you look at the originals, it's there. It would have been added after the fact once it was gifted to George Washington, but that is realistic. The original was made out of English walnut for the stock. The barrel, which was really common, let's get some detail here. On ornate pistols, the barrel was often made out of brass. The main reason for that is brass is much softer and much easier to engrave. So you can see that, maybe I should turn this here so that you can read it. You can see that London, which is where it was manufactured, is engraved here. It's not uncommon to have the entire address along the full barrel, but also the ornate engravings along the top and the base of the barrel here. This is much more easily done in brass, which is a softer material, than steel. So that's really common to see brass as the barrel material. And then all of the ornate details were made out of sterling silver. There's a lot of cool history behind this emblem in particular, but we don't have time to go into it. I'd love to, but that's how I end up talking for far too long. Then you see on the butt plate, grotesque mask. That's really common for the butt plates of pistols in this era. You've got a really ornate plate on the base, on the back of the stock here. One fun fact is the reason why the metal plate on the butt plate here is so common is because, well, let's face it, you fire this weapon once and then you got to reload, but it takes a couple minutes to reload. So in the heat of battle, you don't have that time. You don't want this to be completely useless, so what happens? You don't use it as a firearm. Instead, you use it as a club. So that metal butt plate is there to reinforce the stock so that it doesn't split. Another fun fact. Anyway, really super cool piece. I love the details. As I'm pointing these out, I wouldn't be able to point out all these details if the details weren't present in this wonderful reproduction. Really beautiful piece. I love it. We wouldn't be talking about it if it wasn't so accurate. I love this thing. So happy to have this. Back to you, Iggy. Thanks.
Thanks, Ryan. That's some awesome news. Obviously, a lot of the lingo we use today and things come from this era of guns. And of course, with everything that's going on, Veterans Day coming up and all that type of stuff, really cool to hear some history around, especially George Washington's specific gun. I would say if you were combing medievalcollectibles.com and you weren't sure because you see it from the pictures, I say this is a buy, instant buy. Whatever you see on their site, we saw a number of products that were at fantastic prices that made me actually question how detailed the props would be. But again, actually getting one in hand, I have no questions anymore. These are genuinely awesome products. Great. I can't speak to some of the other things yet that I've seen, but if they're anywhere at the level as this, it's going to be worth it and then some. Once more, this is George Washington's replica flintlock pistol. There are multiples on the website, so whatever is to your fancy. It is medievalcollectibles.com. So head on over to medievalcollectibles.com, pick up some props, some replicas, some great things for you to costume with. Again, there's also clothing and cloaks from many different eras. So be sure you shop them. And I have to feel like there's a comment section when you check out. Tell them Project Nerd sent you. But other than that, another really good close-up of this gun. Wow, just impressive. That's one side here. Let's look again at the others. I'm blown away. MedievalCollectibles.com sent this over. No money was exchanged. Unbiased review here. I am telling you, I'm impressed. I'm impressed. So check them out. Make sure you continue to check us out. Make sure you're subscribing to our YouTube channel for more Unbox It videos, as well as our film festival coverage, interviews, and other podcasts and shorts. You can head on over to projectnerd.com for a little bit more detail written up about this gun, as well as checking out the rest of our content that we share every day and all day across projectnerd.com. That's it for this episode of Unbox It, Pro Nerds. Again, go check out Medieval Collectibles. Worth the buy for sure. And if you're into things like this, you will not be upset. You are going to be impressed. We'll catch you next time.